here for the Power Hour for October 2010, and the subject today is on building custom formats. My name is Ben Allums. I'm Director of Engineering here at WebWorks. We'll start off today's agenda. We're going to go over some questions that you answered when you signed up for this webinar, and then we're going to go into our topic, which is building custom formats. And we're going to try to focus on just the concepts, then the code, and then we'll actually get into doing some practical stuff. And I'd encourage you during that practical session to go ahead and unmute your phone, join me, ask questions. As well, make use of the chat area. You can ask questions through there, and that's a great way to keep everyone on board. In the last part, we'll just highlight some webinars that might be of interest if you want to continue your explorations of ePublisher. Let's start off with the survey results. Next thing is we just want to find out what time we're going to meet in the month of November. And based on this feedback, we're going to move the Power Hour from 1 p.m. Central to 11:30 a.m. Central. So hopefully that'll get lots of people on board and joining us next month. Next part is as far as the topics to cover. Variety of topics up there. The biggest interest was in implementing context-sensitive help. So we'll run through how to accomplish that with WebWorks ePublisher. How you can do that in both your source documents and also in the various output formats, what that looks like. And then the next part is we also request folks to type in, fill in the blank. They can always vote for an existing topic. They can also add additional ones to the mix. And what we do is we take these topics and we add them to our list in future invitations to the Power Hour. And the questions here were, one was asking about using our XML adapter with BTDs other than DITA. So great question. And we can add that to the list of topics to explore. And then the next one looked like to be more of a question, maybe something someone wants to email me directly and ask me this question or go through a support queue, but it's asking about files needed to customize the WebWorks Help 5 template. I can't answer this. You know, there hasn't been significant changes to the structure of WebWorks Help 5 for quite, since the 2008-4 release or prior to that. There have been changes here and there. We would encourage you to make sure you have the latest, greatest version of any security fixes applied to the WebWorks Help runtime. But by and large, if you're customizing skins, things like that, that has largely not changed. So let's go ahead and get into our topic of building custom formats. And while I'm going through this, I would ask everyone here to go ahead and just type into the chat area. Tell me a little bit about why you're interested in this topic and what you're hoping to get from it. I'll tell you that we've covered this topic at various times over ePublisher's lifetime. And I'm taking a little different tack today, which you'll see. But again, we're going to focus on concepts first, try to get you comfortable with that. Then we'll take a look a little bit at what those concepts will look like in actual code. And then we'll actually jump into doing something for real in ePublisher. Let's start off with concepts. Now, just to let you know, what I'm kind of doing today is I'm trying to get this as optimized as possible toward if you're looking to get something accomplished with ePublisher, you're looking to make a change in your output, folks may be coming from a standpoint where they are starting completely from scratch, or they are maybe wanting to customize an existing format. Think about which of those applies to you, and a little later on when we go into the practice session, we can kind of guide the session toward either one of those viewpoints. Let's just start off. There's basically 4 concepts that you need to think about when you're building a custom format with ePublisher. Those are starting with the XML, scripting with XSLT, tracking files that you've created or information files, and then how do you get everything done in the real world? How do you go beyond what XSLT can do? That's where we come into the topic of extension methods. Let's start off with XML. If you're familiar with XML, you know it's a couple things. It's structured content. You have things like containers. You have nesting relationships between data that's stored in an XML structure. And you also have this idea of attributes, which are basically tags that can be placed onto each of these containers. You can the most common one is the identity tag, ID, but there's additional ones that you can add on there. For example, a type tag. And these are the 2 attributes regarding XML. It's hierarchical. You have a way to distinguish things with attributes to make them unique or to make them the same. Now the next part is scripting. What does XSLT give you? Basically, what XSLT gives you is a really great way to work with XML content. XSLT is not the end-all, be-all scripting language. However, if you're working with XML, it works very well for that purpose. How it works is essentially on this idea of matching a context. You match a context, and then you get a chance to either keep that context, or that's what you've matched, or to do something different with it. So if you take an idea of our previous XML kind of container, nested container document, we might define a default rule. Default rules in XSL, you usually use the asterisk to indicate that. And we may give a simple instruction like, okay, copy. Just copy whatever you find. It's easy enough to do that in XSL. We can also do things where we distinguish based on, say, an attribute. We may want to process things that are of type, in this case, AAA, a particular way. And what we can say is, well, we want to wrap those with another element, and then we want to just copy whatever came before. And so when you do that, you get this really great way to take a default structure, preserve what it was, but then also decorate other pieces of information around it. This is a simple explanation of XSLT. You can actually do some very sophisticated things with it. These can go beyond just wrapping simple things. You can actually restructure, you can move things around, you can redecorate. But again, it's all based on this very simple idea of matching a context and giving instructions for how you'd like things to be processed by that context. So the next step in working with ePublisher, again, everything we're working with in ePublisher is XML. Our predominant way to work with that or scripting language is XSLT. The next part, in order to work with a variety of things, it's great to be able to work with a single file and to transform it. But many of the problems we work with in ePublisher require you to find information stored in a variety of files. And one of the things ePublisher does is keep track of a file library for you. And the 2 concepts that are around this are, of course, you need to be able to find files that contain information you need. And you also need to be able to add new files to that file library so folks can find them. To do this, ePublisher uses yet another XML data store. So it has the attributes you'd expect. We have a container of the files, and then we have XML file entries. And those things tell us a variety of things about the file that we're working with, but some of the most important things are they tell us the path, they tell us where the file lives, and they also tell us things like the type. And we'll see a little later on that that's a very important and powerful concept on the ePublisher platform, this idea of identifying a type for the files that we're working with. Now, to add a file to this list is fairly simple. All you have to do is emit new XML, file entries, and those will automatically be added to ePublisher's list of files. And again, it tracks those in the file library for you. All you have to do is just let ePublisher know what you've created. Okay? Let's using the file library. Move on to our last part here, which is the idea of extension methods. As I said before, XSLT is a great language for working with XML content and for restructuring it, matching it, doing all these things. The fact is, though, XSLT only goes so far. On its own, it doesn't give you the capability to work with file paths. It doesn't give you the ability to, let's say, write arbitrary files to the file system. It also doesn't give you the ability to kind of keep track of what your progress is in our log, nor does it give you advanced regular expression string matching capabilities. So to make up for this limitation, the great part is the XSLT runtime we use has this capability for extension methods, and we include a number of default extension methods with ePublisher's platform. There's operations which cover things like the file system, others that let you work with documents so that you can write documents of arbitrary types at different points in your transforms, and also logging capabilities. There's actually a complete list of these out on the WebWorks wiki, and we try to keep those in sync with our source code tree. And you can use any of the functions that we're using in ePublisher formats are documented there for you to use as well in creating your own custom format. Okay, any questions so far? What we've gone over, and while you're thinking about that, I'm going to take a look here at our log and our Q&A log here, and I see that Beverly's talking about some of the work that they're doing and looking to do with ePublisher. And one is they're migrating a ton of legacy documentation from FrameMaker 7 and a highly customized publisher template. Okay, great. So working with ePublisher, you'll find you can do many of the same things as in Publisher. The big difference is that they do take a little different approach to them. Classic Publisher was more of a text-based system. ePublisher works with kind of a bigger blocks. It works with XML blocks, things like that. You can do character-level operations in ePublisher as well, which is one of the nice features of the platform. Big challenge is that although they do very similar things, they can go about it in very different ways. So a lot of times there's not a one-for-one translation between the previous macro language and how you would accomplish something in ePublisher. So the big thing is to map out what it is, the overall effect that you're trying to do, and make sure that you attack the problem with what ePublisher has to offer and XSLT has to offer. What we find when we do this is we're actually getting more consistent results. Things tend to work better and smoother in the long run, and it's actually easier to maintain those customizations over time. The biggest challenge is when you have a customized publisher template, it can be very challenging to identify what those customizations are and pull them out. ePublisher tries to help make sure at all times you can see your customizations and know how to maintain them. Okay, and Amanda had a comment that said she's just new to ePublisher and trying to find out what capabilities exist. Fair enough. All right. So let's go ahead. I didn't see any questions pop up on the high-level concepts. So let's start talking about these same concepts at the code level. Just not to frighten you, but let you kind of see what these things will look like when you're working with ePublisher. So again, we've got the same overview. We're still going to start with the XML, scripts with some XSLT, leveraging the file library, and using extension methods. So when we say start with XML, we really mean it. The ePublisher project file format's in XML. The format definition files are in XML. XSLT is itself XML. all the content you put into ePublisher, whether it's FrameMaker, Word, or Data, gets converted to XML. And in this case, actually, it's converted to what we call the WebWorks Intermediate Format, or WIF. Here's a simple snapshot of what that looks like. Main thing for you to think about, though, is everything I'm putting through ePublisher at some point becomes XML, which means you can touch it, change it, move it, do what you like. The structure in this case is fairly simple. We're trying to capture what a document looks like. So we have a document with content. We track paragraphs and what we call text runs, things like that. And those things are tracked in ePublisher. This next part of scripting with XSLT. Concept and practice on this are identical. We're going to match content, and we're going to emit it in the form we like. So, for example, this is what a simple XSL style sheet might look like. If you take a look, there's a section here. Style sheets usually are just a collection of what they call match templates. You can see that right here. There's a top-level style sheet container, and then it has some nested match templates. And in our case, we're looking at a match template for a paragraph whose style name is heading 1. Great. Once we've identified what we'd like to do with that paragraph, we can actually go in here and say, well, in this case, we'd like to wrap it with an H1 tag, an H1 template. And then we can go ahead and say, okay, apply templates, process everything else as you normally would. So again, what you get into with XSLT is, as long as you can figure out how to match against it and then say what you'd like done with it, XSLT can help get you there. It can help get you your solution. Okay, so we're going to see a little more XSLT later on. Next part is the file library. File library, again, this tracks every file ePublisher knows about. And we're going to be using this idea and concept of types that are available in order to track and find information there. As I showed you before, this is an XML file. There's a files element, and then within that we have file entries. If you take a look, you can see things like types that are tracked against each one of these files. Again, these are important because they allow us to go and find all the files of a given type and process them in the same way. We'll see a little more about how that works, but again, this concept is really important. ePublisher gives you this file library, allows you to type each of the files that you put into it, and then you can query for those and then process against them. Okay? All right. So if you're using this file library, again, if we want to find something, we can query by type. One of the most popular ones to process is the type is called engine WIF. I told you that all of the files that we process at some point are converted to the WebWorks Intermediate Format. We do that work, and then we give you the list of files available, and it's listed as engine:WIF. One aside here, if you're used to the old Publisher platform, one of the huge differences between it and ePublisher is that on the old platform, there were essentially 3 passes made through your data when we processed files. We had a scanning pass, we had a pre-convert pass, and we had a convert pass. And that was great, but you had to do all the work that you were going to do in those 3 stages. The way ePublisher works is it says, well, you can make as many stages or passes over the state as you need to do. And that's good because it really opens up what's possible to do with the platform. It makes each of the stages simpler, they're easier to understand. But the overall effect is the fact that they can be chained together makes them much more powerful and more maintainable than what you could create with the old Publisher platform. Again, part of that is just related to this type-based processing. Okay, so the next part is, again, once we've found some files to process and we've worked with them, how do we add files to this library? Again, it's fairly simple. What we're going to do is in our style sheet, we're just going to identify and say, hey, here are the files I generated. We'll give them types. We'll give them a path. And this will let ePublisher know, okay, got it. I know about this file. And if anyone wants this file later on and wants to do additional processing on it, they can go and ask me for it, and I'll be happy to tell them the answer. Okay. And then this last part. We've talked about the XML, XSLT. We've talked about the file library. And now we'll talk a little bit about the extension methods. Again, these are all the things that you may need to do to create a real-world solution with ePublisher. And these are methods or ways that extend the ePublisher XSL runtime. I mentioned there's a number of them built in. Here, if we start with a simple style sheet, you'll note there are a couple of areas where we're calling out to our extension methods. In this case, we have one that allows us to work with file system paths so we can combine them appropriately. And also we have one that allows us to write documents out to the file system. So these are important, powerful parts of ePublisher because they turn it from being just a collection of scripts or XSLT sitting out there, everything else. It really turns it into a full-bore solution for generating custom output. Okay. We're getting on to the practice part. So before we make this jump, great opportunity now. If you have any questions, you can hit *6 and unmute your phone and start with the questions. We have two routes we can go. We can either start with a fairly minimal format and show you how that works with ePublisher, kind of build up different solutions with it, or we can work on customizing an existing format, or hybrid of the two. Also, too, if you have any questions as I'm switching over here, this is a great time to start asking, again, about these concepts and what you've seen so far. And if anything comes to mind or is not clear, let me know. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. So today I'm going to be using ePublisher Pro. And I've got a custom format set up right here. I've got a bare skeleton. I've got a project set up. And I've created a set of skeleton files to implement a custom format. So first, I'm just going to go ahead and generate this, show you that it's doing something. And what we can do now is I can show you what's going on here. How does this work? So let's start with the first piece. The first piece is that, as I said, I told you everything you work with in ePublisher at some point becomes XML. So let's take a look at this document that we're working with. Right here, we're working with a document called, apologize about that, we're working with the document concern.fm. Now, this could be FrameMaker, it could be Data, it could be Word. I'm just using this for demonstration purposes. I'm using a FrameMaker document. All are supported, though. It's not a problem. Well, let's take a look. This document, concern.fm. I've told you it becomes XML. Let's take a look at what that looks like. First, let's just look at the document itself. If we open this up, I'm using FrameMaker 9 in this case. We see it's got what you would expect, headings, paragraphs, images, things like that, list items, all that good stuff. Okay, looks pretty standard here. Let's try and find out where ePublisher keeps the XML version of that. So in ePublisher, what we're doing is we actually create what we call a data directory. We give you a quick way to access that information. This is good to know if you're developing a custom format, if you need to get really deep into ePublisher. And what you can think of the data directory as being is it's kind of like a scratch pad. It's a scratch pad that you don't show folks generally who are using ePublisher. It's kind of invisible. It's behind the scenes. But it's really important because that's where most of the heavy lifting in ePublisher gets done. So I'm going to click over on this and go to this data directory. I'm going to take a shortcut here. I'm going to just drill down, and I'm going to see that there's a file here called concern.wif. I mentioned that all of the source documents are converted to XML in the form of WIF. Here you go, WebWorks Intermediate Format. And if you take a look, this is the document, your source document, as ePublisher sees it. You'll note we have a number of document conditions that we're tracking. We have paragraph styles that we're tracking, along with all the attributes you specified in your source material. If there's numbering associated, we track that as well. Go on down here. We also have a section on character styles that might be present. Table styles, if those are in use. And then finally, and graphic styles if they're there. And then finally, we go on into the content itself. Some of these things may not make sense to you initially, but a lot of them will. You'll see things like numbering, which say, hey, we have the chapter number as a value of 2. And then we have, say, the text run for a paragraph, impact assessment study process. And we can also see, well, what the style name of a particular paragraph is. In this case, this is chapter. So we have a chapter paragraph, has an auto number 2, and the content is impact assessment study process. If I go back to my source document, I can see that right there. Here it is. Impact assessment study process. There's our auto number, which is number 2. And as well, we can see, if you look down here in the lower left, it's identifying this style name here as being chapter. And so we continue doing this throughout your entire document. We'll also track things, for example, if you have overrides, if you have a style, if someone's manually applied formatting, we actually track all that information. So what we try to do is take every piece of information you have around your source document and we convert that to XML and represent it in WIF. So this is your starting point for whatever it is you want to create or do with ePublisher. Make sense so far? Okay. And again, if you have questions as they occur to you, go ahead and type them in. I am checking periodically to see if new questions are popping up. And that's usually better. That way you won't forget if you go ahead and ask the question. I can just answer it when I get a moment to pause and continue. So, okay. So everything is XML. That's what we start with. Let's go ahead and go into the next part here. Everything's just XSLT. And as I say that, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip a moment. I'm going to come back to the XSLT in just a moment. But I'm going to go on to this idea of the files library. So again, I'm going back to my project, and I'm going to go over to the data directory. And the first thing you'll see in a data directory for your project is something called FilesInfo. This is where the files information is stored by ePublisher. And if you ever want to see what it looks like, you can just open it up. Again, it's just XML. And you can see how ePublisher tracks the files that you generate. some of these are generated for you. Good examples are right here. We have a couple of files here that are done automatically by ePublisher without you doing anything whatsoever. The first one is where we're going in and we're creating, we call something called FMWith in this case. What we're actually doing is we're going and we're taking your FrameMaker document, we're applying cross-reference formats and condition settings and styles and all the other changes that you require in variables. When we do that, we actually change the source document. And the goal for ePublisher is to never touch your source documents. So we need to do this work in a private area. So what we do is we make a copy of that document and we apply the configuration settings as necessary. That way FrameMaker knows how to process its variables, it knows how to process its cross-references. We're going to let FrameMaker do that job for us. We're going to go ahead and type those documents. In this case, it's called engine conversion. Kind of a hidden file down there, but that's the type of file that we're working with. And then you'll also see here, each file can also list a set of dependent files that it depends on. And if you look at this, you see, hey, this document is dependent on the original source document. So if anybody changes the source document, ePublisher knows, oh, you changed the source document, I need to change or update this document over here. Okay? Now, once we've created the intermediate document, the next thing we need to do is create our with document. And sure enough, you'll see here, our next file entry, this is where we're going in, and we're creating that with document. This is the XML equivalent of our source document. And here's the type, engine:with. So if we want to find where this file lives, wherever it lives, all we have to do is say, let me have everything of type engine:with, and I'll have that data. Okay? And sure enough, what we're doing here is we're making sure this depends on that intermediate file. So we've created a chain of dependencies so that ePublisher can help keep things up to date and will give you the opportunity to know, did this file change? Do we need to update it? All right? This is the file library. If you're trying to figure out where something is or where it's gone to, you can always look in here. All those files are tracked here. Every piece of information you could want to know about your file or format's progress is tracked in here. This is handy, as I said, because some of these things, like for example, this scratchpad area used for the data folder is in a somewhat hidden location. ePublisher manages this location and removes older uses to keep the number of files laying around the system to a minimum. However, again, keep in mind, though, that in order to do that, ePublisher is using your system's temporary store location for this function. So it's a good idea to kind of use this. Again, if you are having trouble locating where a file lives, this is a great place to go and look. The answer is in here somewhere. Okay. So let's FilesInfo. So we've talked about converting everything to XML. We've shown you what that looks like. We talked about the files library and some of the things that ePublisher puts in there by default. The next steps, though, are going to be talking about how do we use XSL to do something with that? How can we add our own file entries into that library? And then finally, how are we going to use extension methods to get a complete solution? So to show you that, what I've done is I've created a project. And this project has something kind of special about it. It actually has what we call a project level format. What you can do in ePublisher is actually come in here and go into the Formats folder, and you can actually create a brand new format. I named mine Custom Format. Very inventive. And I'll make this archive available to you. But basically here, this one has some very simple attributes and gives you a very minimal format to start with. Formats really are comprised pretty much of just a format definition file, which we'll take a look at here, and then at least one XSL transform. That's all you need. Custom format, what is it specifying? Well, a couple of things that show up in here. First of all, we talk about format definition file has a variety of parts. The first one, again, XML as always. Format container. Web capabilities, we don't really necessarily need to work with those. I won't go into those. Those are in detail. You can learn more about those in other times, but we just say, hey, we don't have any unique capabilities declared for this format. We can identify some task groups. This is useful for having things show up in the File Explorer. There's a task group for generate, so we just kind of let ePublisher know, hey, what files are we generating? And then the next part is where we really get into the meat of the format, which is, let's do some work. In this case, what we're going to do is we define these things in pipelines. There's a pipeline section. We can have a variety of pipelines to operate on files with. For ours, we're just going to declare a simple pipeline called custom, and we're going to have one stage in that pipeline. Okay? Way to think about this is pipelines are a sequence of stages that are executed, and if you want to add more than one stage to a pipeline, you can certainly do that. But if you also want to, if you find a natural break or you have some dependencies, you can use pipelines to set up dependencies between things. Again, that's more of a detail, just kind of trying to illustrate for you why this looks this way and what you might see in some of the other formats defined or used by ePublisher. The real kernel, though, is down here where we finally get to a stage. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell ePublisher, hey, I want to get something done. We want to take an action. So you'll see here we've identified the action that we want to take. We want to call this XSL transform. We let it know that the stage type is an XSL transform. And we have a couple of parameters we'd like to pass down to that transform. This is the type-based processing we talked about. In this case, you'll note that we're outputting, we want to process things of type engine with, which are those with documents we started with. And then we're going to tag everything on output with this page output type. So if we do these two things, we're giving ourselves the opportunity to locate things in the files library and also place things back into the files library and know what their types are. Okay. Now what happens is whenever a format's loaded, ePublisher looks for this format definition file and reads it so it knows how to execute your format. The nice part about this is, again, ePublisher, as long as it's a format definition file with the associated actions, it'll process it. It's really not too picky about much else. I mean, this really is the minimum required to do it. All you have to do to get ePublisher happy and running. Okay, so ePublisher knows about the sequence of actions it's going to take. It's tracking this FilesInfo for you. It's XML everywhere. Let's get something done with the XSL. Let's open up this XSL. Now I've added a few things in here, but I've tried to keep this as minimal as possible. We'll kind of step through what we're looking at here. first thing you're going to see is this is an XSL style sheet. There it is. You're also going to see that it has a number of template matches, as we talked about, for our processing. And there's some additional ones down here that we're going to talk about a little later on. But again, we're just doing match templates throughout to process our XSL content, or XML content. Okay, next part. There's a variety of things up here that these are all XML namespace declarations. We'll talk a little more about those later on. Just know that those are a way for when you're working with XML, if you need to discriminate different things, use XML namespaces to do that. Next part is some parameters that we're going to be working with. We have a couple of different things. Two of them are ones that we set in our format definition file. We said, hey, what's the dependent type that we're working with? And what's the output type we want to generate? You could easily just type that value straight into this transform, although I'd encourage you usually to go ahead and pass those in from your format definition file. It gives you a lot more flexibility down the road and allows you to pull some neat tricks with ePublisher's format processing. But again, that's just passing us the values that we set in the format file. These others up here, though, are a little different. There's global input, global pipeline name, global project, global files. These are actually kind of what you'd expect them to be. Let's start with global files. Global files, that's that FilesInfo. That's that file library. We can actually see and query for everything in there. Basically what ePublisher's done is it's already loaded that XML file for you, so it's got a copy hanging out available to you. So you can just go and query information from it. So that's good. Global input is also a form of that global files. If you're getting started, though, you can just worry about using global files. Not a problem. Global input's kind of an optimization thing. It allows you to work with just a single document selection. It's safe to not worry about it. Next part is the pipeline name. In this case, our pipeline, again, each of these stages lives within a pipeline. There's cases where you might call the same stage from different pipelines. You may want to have slightly different behaviors based on that. So we give you access to the pipeline name. And finally, the project itself. ePublisher is XML, even the project definition files. So if you need to look for something in the project file, ePublisher hands it over to you so that you can see that project file. Okay? So fairly simple. These first four are standard parameters ePublisher is just going to set up and give to you by default. If you declare these parameters, now you can access them and start working with them. Okay, so let's go ahead and now get into actually doing something here. First thing we're going to do is in XSLT, what you usually perform is what they call a root match. We're just going to match on the root match. And you're going to see this a lot in ePublisher. All of our transforms start off with a root match template. And pretty much the next thing you'll see is a files declaration, where we're going to go ahead and report the files that we've generated. What you're seeing here is already the beginnings of how we tell ePublisher what we've processed and get that added to the files library. So usually in the ePublisher root match template, we'll just declare the file. And you also see right here where we'll put in our files entry. And it's kind of what we talked about earlier. There's a files entry. We would tell it the path. We tell it the type that we've processed. Remember that type that we're passing in? That's where those are being used. And then if we have some additional qualifiers, we can pass those along as well. Like if there's a particular group ID or document ID, we'll go ahead and let ePublisher know, hey, this document is associated with this group, or this file is associated with this group or document ID. It's another piece of information you can query for. And finally, we'll also go ahead and tell it about the dependency information. Say, all right, we're dependent on the file that we read to generate our output. So there we are. We've kind of gone through the mechanics there of adding in files to the file library. Great, we've added something, but how do we process things? Well, right up here is where we're going to do this. In this case, what I've created here is just a loop. I'm just going to loop over. I'm using XSL and its ability to process XML. And I say, hey, I'd like you to start with that file list, that file library. And I'd like for you to look through it, and I want you to find everything in the file library whose type is that dependency type we requested. The one we asked for was engine with. So let's just take a look at that for a second. Let's go back over to our project. I'm going to go to the data directory, and I'm going to open up FilesInfo. And I'm also going to go back for a moment and go to our format definition file. So let's see, our format definition file says, all right, we want to process everything that's of type engine:with. So I want to go over to my file library, and I want to find what some of those files are. There's one. Type is engine:with. And it's this path down here, long thing, and ends with concern.with. Okay. So let's just start with something simple there. Again, we want to query into this thing, find everything that's a file element that matches that type. And if we get one of those, then we want to store it in a variable called with file. Fair enough. And then to make sure we've got it right, what we're going to do is we're going to just write a message to the ePublisher log. We're going to say, hey, what is the path of that file we just found? If you're new to ePublisher or new to XML, you'll see that we have a pointer to this file entry, and you see that it has an attribute called path. And the way you query for that in XSL is you say the element name, and then you give it this path, and use this special syntax, the ampersand, and then the attribute name, and that'll return its value. So let's go ahead and just write this out to the ePublisher log. We just want the path to show up. Now to do that, as I mentioned before, XSLT doesn't have certain features by default. What we want to do is have ePublisher show this in its conversion log, and we can use an extension method. Here's one of the first ones we'll use. www.log. What this is a collection of logging methods which allow you to send messages, warnings, or errors in places in the ePublisher log. To use this, we did have to make a declaration up top. Told you we'd come back to this, and right here is the one. That log is accessed, or those facilities are accessed through this prefix. So we declare it here. We also add it to this exclude result prefixes because it basically says no one needs to know that we're using this. I know, and I see I've actually missed this. I need to add that in. Okay. No one needs to know that we've generated that. And fair enough. And right now, I'm just going to go ahead and remove this for now. What this will give us is, again, this will loop through all the WIF files that we find. It'll log it. And let's still keep this even simpler. All right, great. So this is going to loop through and log this. If we go ahead and have ePublisher process, looks like I am I see. I've got some of these files open, so ePublisher is complaining that I have got its files locked. Let's just close everything out to make sure we're not standing in the Windows is all right, there we go. I apologize, I'm just getting us reset here. All right, so now if I go ahead and regenerate this, what I'll see is that ePublisher did what we talked about doing. We looked in the FilesInfo and we found that path and we've reported it. Concern.with. Okay, in this case there was only one file, so we processed it. If we wanted to add more, we certainly could. We could actually add another document here. Let's see. Go ahead and add one more. And now we'll go ahead and have ePublisher run through, and now ePublisher is going to actually process 2 WIF files, and sure enough, now our code starts processing 2 files. So the nice part about this is we really don't care how many there are. There could be none, there could be one, there could be many. ePublisher is just going to loop through and do all those operations. And that's a great way, again, just a nice attribute of XSL. All right, so writing those to the log is great. Not too wonderful, though, as far as if we want to actually do some real work. So let's add some stuff here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add an entry here to actually load that WIF document up. And we're using a special method. XSLT does have a method for doing this. We have an optimized one, though, that we use called load XML without resolver. And all we have to do is just say, hey, we'd like to load this file. So we give it the path, have it loaded up. And so now we have that XML document in memory, and we can start doing things with it. Now, what we're going to do with it in this case is we're going to do what's called an apply templates. We're going to process that document. We're just going to say, hey, I want you to run some matches, and as you match against things, I'd like you to make changes to the document. That's it. That's all it does. We're using here what's called a moded template. I'm just giving it a mode called process content, and it's going to run through and do that processing for us. If you look down here, I've created those modes. This is very simple. This is just boilerplate standard XSLT match template that's just going to copy everything and just process it through without changing anything. We're going to say anytime we encounter an element, just go ahead and copy that element, copy all the attributes it has, and then just keep processing. Process everything underneath it. If we have any text, we're going to do the same thing there. And if we have any comments or processing instructions, go ahead and just copy those as well. We can even add one more. I just realized we did leave one out. There's also a root match on the process, on the content. We can go ahead and have ePublisher even take control of that level of processing. Okay. So these moded templates, you'll note we have 2 templates that match on this root match element. We have this one in process content and this one up here. And we're discriminating between those with this mode parameter. So XSLT lets you match the same thing multiple times or in different ways, and you can run through again with these moded templates. So that's a fairly standard XSLT convention, and ePublisher uses it to good effect throughout its processing pipeline. Go ahead and maximize this up. Okay, so we've seen here we're loading a document. We're going to process it. And then the next thing we do, now that we've processed it, we have to do something with it. So in ePublisher, the way we do that is we're going to capture the result into a variable. And there's a little recipe for doing that. And basically, you want to process it into a variable and then use an extension method called MSXSL node set to convert it to something we can do additional work on or further work on. Okay? So this is great. We've done our work. We've made our changes to the document. The next thing is we've got our content processed, but we want to do something with it. So here's again where we're going to go into ePublisher a bit and use some of these extension methods. One of these are going to be file system operations to combine file paths. Also, we have some that are project extension methods. What's our output directory target path? I don't know. Let's ask ePublisher to tell us what that answer is. We can also say, hey, what's the group name? You know, this document lives within a group. What is that group name? So you actually ask it for that information. And we can use that to build up our output directory path. And then finally, we've actually got to get a file path to generate. So again, we can continue to use these operations. We can use that with file name, and we'll just use its base name. Combine that with the output directory path, and then there we go. We've got a log path. We've got an output path for us. Just to make sure we're getting that right, we can go ahead and log it out. We'll add a message to do that. And then our final step is going to be to actually write the file. And again, here's where we're using an ePublisher extension method. This allows us to write multiple files out of a single XSL transform. So we use this document method, and we tell it to write that content to that file path. We can give some additional qualifiers. We'd like to encode it as UTF-8. We'd like to write it as XML. And we'd like to pretty print it, make it look really nice on the output. And then finally, this last part, as we said, we'll go ahead and report to ePublisher what files we've generated. That way ePublisher can clean up files that we're no longer using, and it can do some other things like that, and also makes this file available for processing later on. Make sure this is saved. And I'm just going to go ahead and regenerate this. Now, what you'll note is ePublisher will reload that XSL file, and it picked up the changes. Not sure why we're getting a duplicate file there, but if we take a look here, we've got our two output file paths. And if we go and look in our output directory, you can see that we've got those same WIF files we started off life with, just concern.wif. Not too complex. We just, again, passed them through without any changes. But the good part was, again, we didn't just copy this file. We actually went through piece by piece and made a decision about what we were going to keep and not keep as we processed through. All right. So let's make a couple of other changes to this before we move on from here. See what my mistake is. We're tracking the output directory path instead of the file path. And again, as I said, we can continue to add new files to this. So we can go ahead and add another document. and ePublisher will again suddenly start. Now it's going to process 3 files, and our transform is going to process those 3 files. We didn't add any additional code to process those different ones, but because we were looping through all the files of that type, we're still doing those operations. Quick question here, let's see. One of the questions was about running a customization PowerPoint, about creating a customized report. Okay, custom reports. Nice part is the way custom reports are implemented uses all these techniques. So you can certainly use those. The other question was talking about modifying skins. Okay. Well, Joan, we can certainly add that to the list of questions or topics for us to cover in future sessions. And again, skin customizations, by and large, don't require XSLT changes. Reports do. And reports, though, again, the nice part is you can do whatever you like with them. So let's do a couple more things before we leave this format right now. And we'll go ahead and shut down for the session for today. The good part is right now you can see we've got a good base here to process our document, but we haven't really said, I don't know if we necessarily want to process everything that we're going through here. So let's just make a couple of changes. The first one I'm going to make is I'm going to change this file path. I'm going to change the extension to HTML. So I'm going to use the XSL concat operation. I'm going to add on a .htm to the end of the file name. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the rules about how we process our content. I'm going to say that we go ahead and we'll process, let's go ahead and put everything into an HTML container. I'm just going to make up a title here. Okay, and then I'm going to still process just this way we've normally done before. But what I'm doing here is now I've suddenly changed. I've introduced a change to how this topic is going to be processed. Let's fire this off and see what we get. Okay, there's our extension changed to .html. I'm going to go ahead and open this in Notepad, and we'll note if we look at this, there's the markup we put, HTML, head, body, and then we had whatever was going on before, just all the content splatted in there. As it turns out, we really don't care about the document or the style stuff. We really want to get into this area down here called the content. So what we're going to do is just tell ePublisher that. We're going to say, look, instead of just applying templates and processing everything else, I want you to select under document, I want you to find content. And I want you to process all of those children. Okay, so now we're actually changing, not just that we're matching on everything, we just changed our starting point for the match. Let's see here. We'll let ePublisher run through there. If I can find my output folder. What we're going to see is now suddenly we've got that same head area, but now we're starting to see the content of the page, in this case a paragraph. So again, what we're suddenly starting able to do is slowly but surely start to craft this to look and work how we want it to work. to get the output we want. We're going over quite a while here, and I know we've covered a lot of stuff, so I'm going to shut us down. If anybody does have any additional questions, you're welcome to stay after, and I'm happy to help. I'm happy to show you additional customizations of this transform. There we are. There's some getting your feet wet with custom formats. Again, when the recording for this session is posted, we'll also post this project so you can begin playing with that yourself. Main concepts you're working with. Everything's in XML. XSL is a great way to process that XML. All the information you're going to need is available in the files library. You can load and access any piece of data you like. And ultimately, too, if there's something you can't do in straight XSL, there's a way to do it through ePublisher extension methods, either using the default ones, or there's even techniques to introduce your own. Okay, so to close out, webinars of interest. A couple of highlights. Next month, in November, for our Show Me session, we're going to be covering single sourcing your content with ePublisher. Also, too, we'll be introducing folks to ePublisher 2010.3. So that's going to be at 11:30 a.m. Central on November 18th. And if you drop down there to the sign-up page, you can go and click through and add your name to the list of attendees. The next session as well is Study Hall. If you've liked what you started doing here in building a custom format and you have more questions about that topic, Study Hall is a great place to go. If you have questions about custom reports, Study Hall is a great place to go. Jesse Wiles hosts it. He's our senior developer here at WebWorks, and he does that on the second and last Wednesdays of every month. And that's at November 10th at 1 p.m. Central. Bring your questions, bring your code. Jesse loves to experiment and go through all those things. So please go see Jesse in the study hall. And finally, too, we do have archives of both Power Hour and Show Me sessions. So if you missed something or you want to go back over it again, you will receive a notification once those recordings are posted, and then you can go back at any time and review those. All right, I want to thank you for joining me, being patient. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the session. I see a lot of full heads. That's good. Y'all enjoy the afternoon. Take care.